Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Salam Media. The time is 25 minutes past 9. And as I mentioned before we went to the break, in a bit, we'll be speaking to Chad Thomas. He's an organized crime expert, and we'll be looking at extortion rackets, particularly those ran by the so-called construction mafias, have become a pervasive issue across South Africa, with devastating impacts on infrastructure projects, local economies, and community safety. And what began as a regional concern has now spread nationwide, with organized crime syndicates targeting everything from large scale construction projects to small township businesses. The situation has obviously been exacerbated by the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think after that is when we started seeing, these extortionists and these construction mafias really starting to take off, and leaving many communities vulnerable to these criminal enterprise. And we'll be delving into the alarming rise of these extortion rackets and explore potential solutions to this crisis. And joining us to unpack this issue is organized crime expert Chad Thomas. Chad, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you here on Salam Media.
Thank you so much for inviting me this morning.
I think we've spoken extensively about the construction mafia, but it seems the issue of extortion has now expanded to other spheres of businesses. I think this past week and a half, it has been highlighted that these mafias, these extortion rackets, are also targeting even schools and clinics and smaller businesses like tuck shops. What's the modus operandi? How do they work? And the targeting of smaller businesses. When did that come to be? Because I think in the beginning it used to be construction mafias, where they would come to construction projects and say, you can't work at this particular place if you don't pay us a certain fee, or we need to get a share of whatever you make from whatever project that you're working on. If you just expand on just how this threat has expanded, essentially.
Yeah, so construction mafia became a very well-known protection racket in South Africa because it impacted specifically on service delivery, whether it was the building of roads, the building of clinics, the buildings of teaching facilities, even the building of RDP houses. But protection rackets have been around for a very long time, and protection rackets operate on the premise of extortion. We found that if one looks to America and the mafia grew as a result of charging protection fees to Italian immigrants. They targeted their own people, promising them protection from the local authorities, promising them protection from rival gangs. But of course, if their own people didn't pay them protection fees for their small businesses, it was those very people that would come back and burn down the business or break the stock and the inventory and hurt individuals. And the mafia grew exponentially during the prohibition period in America as a result of these so-called protection rackets. In South Africa, protection rackets aren't an unnew phenomena. We've seen them around for a number of years. We saw them especially active in the Western Cape, particularly in Cape Town, in the club environment, the entertainment environment, the restaurant environment, where so-called security service providers would demand that they put their bouncers at the door, and then they'd say there's an increased need for bouncers at the door. And of course, if you didn't pay them to have their bouncers at the door, and those bouncers, of course, controlled the drug trade, they would then smash up the place and smash up the patrons. So the protection rackets across the board in South Africa cross every single societal boundary. We're now seeing in the informal sector, people that have little barbershops, salons that perhaps have, like you mentioned, trading stores or tuck shops as they're termed. If they're not paying the protection rackets what the protection rackets term to be taxed, they get hurt. And as a message to others that are in the same industry within that community, they may even kill the people to make sure that the other people realize that this is a very real threat and they need to pay up to be protected. The ironic thing is they're paying to be protected from the very people that they're giving money to.
I want to chat a bit about, how law enforcement has been dealing with all of this. There've been efforts by the government. They are saying there's increased policing. They've established the Built Environment Anti-Corruption Forum. In your view, how effective have these measures been in curbing the influence of these mafias, or the law enforcement agencies are seemingly as clueless, or in many other instances that we've read about, also working with these mafias?
So, look, in an organization that employs 180,000 people, the South African Police Service, there will be a couple of bad apples, and they themselves are involved in extortion, especially when it comes to undocumented immigrants or immigrants that are running spaza shops or other industries within the informal sector. But one must understand that crime as a whole in South Africa is at an all-time high. And it's not just extortion, protection rackets. We've also got kidnap for ransom. We've got ATM bombings. We've got CRT heists. We've got murder for hire. And what we see is every time there's a new challenge and the media speaks about it, the police throw all their resources at it. So we saw all the police resources thrown at murder for hire when we saw whistleblowers being assassinated and people in the entertainment industry being assassinated. Kidnap for ransom, as it grew, we saw all the police resources thrown at that. The same with ATM heists, the same with CRT. So they throw all the resources at one particular problem, then they leave the other problem to rebuild itself in the background. And this is a direct as a result of the fact that there's limited budget. When you don't have sufficient budget, you can't have sufficient manpower. When you look at the amount of police officers per capita to every 100,000 people in South Africa, we're sitting at about half the required amount. But now when you look at how that's measured worldwide, those countries don't have the massive contact violent crime problems that South Africa has. So we should have about 3 to 4 times the amount of police officers that we actually have. But most importantly, we should have more detectives and more members of the Hawks that are qualified to investigate. We heard during Operation Chanela last year that 600,000 people were arrested. Well, I don't know if those 600,000 people went through the court process, whether they were successfully prosecuted. And I know they're not in prison because our prisons are currently holding 140,000 people. They're about 15% over capacity. So it doesn't help to go out on these supposedly proactive crime drives and arrest dozens of people if you can't have somebody to investigate that docket and conversely have a prosecutor who's able to take that docket through the court process to secure a prosecution. So that's where we're falling short. The boots on the ground, the visible policing, we're seeing a lot more of that. But what we need is crime intelligence to be capacitated so that their intelligence-driven investigations can become prosecutorial guided investigations that can lead to the prosecutions of the kingpins so that they send a very, very clear message that this will not be tolerated.
Are there examples around the world? And I think when I say around the world, maybe South America could be a perfect example, where the issue of racketeering and extortion has always been the problem in that part of the world, where they have significantly dealt with it, and South Africa can take some of the examples and try and implement them right here at home.
Yes, there have been. We look at Rio. Rio changed the entire policing structure in the way in which they investigated crime and took a proactive stance in respect of criminal syndicates that were operating. So in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, they experienced success. Mexico City in Mexico, the most populated city in the world, we've seen great success in the reduction of kidnapping, the reduction of violent crime, although crime in Mexico does still appear to be somewhat high because of the drug cartels. They have been able to lower some of the incidents. If one goes to Medellin, which is a city in Colombia, they've been able to control and bring down the numbers of murder for hire that was taking place. South America, much like South Africa, have their own terminology for murder for hire. They call their hitmen sicarios. We call our hitmen Kabi. And what's frightening is we're seeing a lot of what was happening in South America in the late 90s, early 2000s now playing out in South Africa. South Africa currently sits as at number 1 for the number of kidnappings taking place in Africa. We've grown to number 6. We were number 7 last year worldwide, so we're the 6th highest incidence of kidnapping in the world. And of course, we're now seeing this massive spike in extortion across the board. So from a violent crime perspective, South Africa rates in the top 5, easily the top 3, in some cases, said the top 1 position.
We saw, I think it was yesterday, where police minister, the new Police Minister Senzo Mchunu was essentially giving plans, unveiling some of the strategies of how they plan to deal with the extortion rackets and all of these mafias. What did you make of that? Do you think he has a comprehensive plan? Do you think South Africans can be hopeful and rest assured that this issue, which is seemingly spreading all across South Africa, is going to be dealt with?
Yes, we need to see a lot more public-private partnerships. We need to see a lot more collaboration between state law enforcement and public sector security. We saw Major General Khan from the National Crime Intelligence Office establish these partnerships in terms of the anti-kidnapping task teams, and we've seen results coming out of that. And we need to see this applied across the board in terms of other criminal syndicates that are operating. That means more capacity, more resources to crime intelligence, more capacity, more resources to SAPS detectives, more capacity, more resources to the Hawks. One thing I can tell you is the new minister has come out guns blazing, pardon the pun. He's speaking he's saying the right things. He's speaking the language we want to hear. It's a lot better. It's a lot more articulate than what we heard from our previous minister. This minister has spoken in such a tone that he understands that it's impacting South Africans. When one reads his speech from last week, when the crime stats were released in Cape Town on Friday, he spoke about how it impacts each and every single South African. When he spoke about the policemen that have been killed in the line of duty, he spoke about their families and the support that their families require. The man is speaking a language that we want to hear. He's speaking in a tone that we appreciate, and we hope that it continues. There seems to be a renewed energy with the GNU, and we're hoping that this continues. We're seeing that the police are taking their role exceptionally seriously, and we also making note of the fact that the police are responding in kind to the way in which they are being treated. They are not approaching these criminal syndicates with kid gloves. They're approaching these criminal syndicates in a very hard manner. And that's what these people need to understand. If you're going to commit crime, there's consequences, and you have to live with those consequences and live with the accountability. Because for so long, we haven't seen consequences, we haven't seen accountability. And this new administration seems to be invested in making a change and seems to have taken cognizance of the fact that one of the priorities among South Africans is to fight the scourge of crime.
And before I let you go, maybe I can just throw this question in. The KZN police, in particular, I think there's been more than 35 suspects that have been killed in shootouts with the KZN police since April. There's been a lot of criticism from some sects that Jerome Kwanazi is iron-fisted approach is not one that should be adopted nationwide. These are trigger-happy policemen. Shooting everything that's on site. I mean, more than 30 suspects in space of less than a month. Well, what do you make of this approach by the KZN police commissioner and what they're doing there? This no nonsense, again, guns blazing kind of approach. Is it one to criticize, or this is how we should be dealing with criminals in South Africa?
KwaZulu-Natal is known for violent crime. In fact, the term Izinkabi comes from KwaZulu-Natal. We know that Izinkabi traveled throughout the country, but they trained in KwaZulu-Natal. A lot of the CIT, ATM, murder for hire, kidnap for ransom syndicates use their soldiers from KZN. So when the police are making arrests or wanting to make arrests or participating in operations in KwaZulu-Natal, the risk of them coming under fire is very severe. And the fact is they're now going in and they are not prepared to get killed. They are going in now with more members, with more facilities made available to them, with more resources. They're going in what we call hard. And a lot of people don't like this. But if these are criminals, and if these criminals are shooting at police officers, the police officers have every right to protect themselves. It's not just the citizens' lives who are at risk, it's also the policemen's lives who are at risk. So they're fighting fire with fire. I think General Tumbeni from Gauteng has looked at this, and he's also making operations where they're going to go in hard. General Patekile in the Western Cape, we saw last week in Milnerton, an extortion ring was taken out. There were 6 of them. They shot at the police officers. Some were arrested, some were shot dead. And I think General Masimolo, from a national perspective, is also taking cognizance of the fact that criminals don't care about the lives of police officers and civilians. And you must understand, if you've got one van or two police officers that arrive at the scene of a CRT heist where there may be 15 armed robbers that have automatic rifles, that have explosives, they don't care about the lives of those two police officers. What you're now seeing through intelligence-driven investigations is that the police will arrive on that crime scene with maybe 30 members that are armed correctly. And when those guys open fire on the police are ready for them and they neutralize that threat. Of course, we cannot allow for this to spiral out of control and for innocent people to be caught in the crossfire. But if you shoot at a police officer, don't be surprised when your family bury you.
I think we're going to leave it there. Chad Thomas, IRS Forensic Investigations, and also organized crime expert. Really appreciate you giving us your time. We're going to leave it here for now.
Thank you.
There we go. Yeah, I think really interesting approach coming out of the KZN. Hey, almost 30 suspects being killed by the police, and well, the leadership of General Mkhwanazi. Some are saying, well, you know, we shouldn't be having police that are trigger happy and are shooting anything that's on sight. While others are saying, as Chad mentions, that criminals don't care about the lives of policemen, and you know, police should react the same way. They shouldn't care about the lives of criminals. You know, I think it was just last week where there was the commemoration of the fallen policemen. I think it was at the Union Buildings where they were honored, and it was really sad seeing some of the children of the police that were killed in the line of duty. And yeah, I think maybe that's the approach. You know, fight fire with fire. Yeah. But you don't want it to get out of hand where you have innocent civilians being caught in the crossfires Chad mentions. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be having a really interesting conversation with Mohammed Mo Valley, who said to shatter motorsport record. This is a 15-year-old who sees himself as, you know, the next big thing on the asphalt. And we'll be chatting to him about, you know, his love for race cars and, you know, being some of South Africa's youngest champions. At only 15, has already won 5 South African championships, 4 African championships, and the FIA African Karting Cup Championship title. So yeah, speaking to a champion at only 15, achieving really, really amazing things. More on that right after this.